This year marked a watershed moment for Israel, for the American Jewish community, and for our work at Israel Policy Forum. 2025 saw the end of the war in Gaza and the return of all living hostages from captivity, along with a 12-day war against Iran that set back its nuclear program. The immediate threat that Hamas, Iran, and Hezbollah pose to the lives of Israeli citizens is now minimal compared to what it was on October 6, 2023. In Gaza, where the devastating humanitarian crisis had reached a fever pitch, the war has now given way to the day after. Palestinian civilians deserve the opportunity to imagine a better future, free from both Hamas and Israeli bombardments. After 2 years of war, we can finally focus on building the way forward. Throughout the trauma, tumult, and triumphs of the October 7th era, policymakers in Washington and members of the American Jewish community relied on Israel Policy Forum to cut through the noise of contested narratives and charged rhetoric to deliver credible analysis and thoughtful commentary on events in Israel and the region. Now, we are looking to the future. The past year's events have created a new set of questions, challenges, and opportunities. What is needed to disarm Hamas and prevent Gaza from serving as a launching pad for attacks on Israeli civilians? What can be done to provide Palestinians with genuine hope for a better reality after decades of fading prospects for sovereignty in the West Bank and in the wake of Gaza's devastation? What will it take to safeguard Israel's future as secure, Jewish, and democratic amid persistent external and internal challenges? Israel Policy Forum is sober and clear-eyed in recognizing the challenges to our vision. At the same time, we are doubling down to offer policy analysis and recommendations that focus on genuine opportunities for progress. In the community, our IPF Atid program is building the next generation of young professional leaders who reject the zero-sum framing that has come to dominate the discourse, instead embracing dialogue and pragmatism.
Israel Policy Forum's voice has never been more important, offering thoughtful insight in a moment when nuance can feel lost.
IPF is creating the most incredible community, and folks have said to me over and over that this is the first space they have in Cleveland to really have more depolarized and nuanced conversations on Israel.
I got the opportunity to meet amazing young leaders in Israel and in the US who are just as committed as I am to promote liberal democratic values and make a real change.
Young adults need this right now.
From Palestinian Authority reform and Gaza stabilization to Israel's regional normalization, opportunities abound for engaged U.S. leadership to lead to real positive change and for reimagining the contours of a U.S.-Israel relationship rooted in shared interests and shared values. In a moment of profound uncertainty, our work remains essential.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is David Halprin. I'm honored to be the CEO of Israel Policy Forum. And I want to say just on behalf of all of us, and especially the staff, one last Mazal Tov and thank you to the Bobs. It's no small thing for an organization like ours to honor the Bobs because, frankly, it's an honor for us to have been partners with you in this journey. We are talking about two titans of Jewish communal leadership, and we have been such beneficiaries of their guidance. Bob Elman in particular, you saw how deeply committed he is to the Jewish people, to a secure Jewish democratic Israel. He's been a critical partner and mentor for me. His thoughtfulness and kindness are at this point legendary. Our organization's board and staff have been the beneficiaries in time and time again. In his role as chair of our personnel committee, I've personally benefited from his guidance and encouragement as we've built our staff, making sure that we're not only built to make an impact, but also built to be a great place to work. And I will say on Bob Sugarman, he's just been instrumental in our growth. You've heard very clearly his consistent championing of Israel's security, and his steady support of the growth of the IPF Atid Young Professionals Program. And I know that both of the Bobs are so proud of that IPF Atid today is serving as that pipeline for the next generation of policy and community leaders. Bob Sugarman has been a fierce advocate for keeping open the opportunity for two states, as you heard, because he recognizes the imperative of Israel's security in the short and long terms. And with Atid, he's been so eager to listen, to understand, to engage the next generation. Both of these Bobs joined our board when it was just a fledgling operation, at the encouragement of those you heard, including Peter Joseph, and their reputations and experience in Jewish communal leadership brought to us credibility and gravitas, and their leadership and guidance has been essential in pushing our work forward. So let me say one last time, on behalf of all of us, thank you to the Bobs, Bob Sugarman and Bob Elman. Thank you. I want to take one more moment to thank our event chair, Bob Goodkind, because we can't have an event this successful without all the Bobs possible, as you know. And I also want to thank IPF staff, Rebecca Lieder-Kramer, Lissy Dieringer, Elad Raymond. Especially thank you so much to our team, please. And of course, I want to thank you all for being here, for supporting our work, especially now, at this especially critical juncture for the future of Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the U.S.-Israel relationship. Today, we all see that the discourse about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has never been more toxic. And that is why Israel Policy Forum's work today remains so essential. There's never been a more glaring, frankly, a more clear need for the nuance, the depth, and the pragmatism that Israel Policy Forum brings in our policy content and in our community programs. Whether on security, on governance, humanitarian assistance, politics, diplomacy, and more, policymakers and community leaders are turning to Israel Policy Forum for credible information, for ideas, for analysis, for commentary, and they're looking for that voice that cuts through all the noise and all the usual point-scoring talking points. The work ahead, frankly, has never been more demanding or more essential. Earlier this year, Israel Policy Forum was proud to announce the creation of a new policy council, a truly impressive and accomplished roster of experts who have deep experience and knowledge on an array of key issues. This council will help to expand IPF's reach and deepen our expertise amidst the growing demand we are seeing. And the growing demand is for credible, level-headed voices in Washington and in the wider Jewish community. So I'm so thrilled to introduce our panel today with two new members of our IPF Policy Council to discuss a very big topic of the moment, and that is, what is the future of U.S. leadership in the wider Middle East? Because here, too, we are at a critical crossroads. On the one hand, one could argue that the United States is more actively engaged in seeking to reduce and resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and to expand Israel-Arab normalization than at any point in the past 25 years. And on the other hand, there are more questions about the future and the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship and about U.S. interests in the wider region than at any point in recent memory. So what are the crucial U.S. interests in the region today, and how can we safeguard them? What is the case for active, sustained, and constructive U.S. engagement in the broader Middle East? Joining us to discuss these questions and more are IPF Fellows Ambassador Michael Ratney and Elisa Ewers, together with IPF's Washington Managing Director and Senior Policy Analyst Rachel Brandenburg. Ambassador Ratney has helped to shape Middle East policy in the region through his numerous posts in both Democratic and Republican administrations. Among them, he was U.S. Consul General in Jerusalem, Special Envoy for Syria, and of course, most recently, U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Elisa Ewers has been engaged in U.S. policy from her vantage point in Washington. She served as a Senior Director at the National Security Council for the Middle East. She's been an Adjunct Fellow at the Center for New American Security, and of course, most recently served as the Senior Staff Director at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And it is my honor now to pass the floor to Rachel Brandenburg, who leads our strategic work in Washington and who herself has served in key roles advising officials at the Pentagon, State Department, and House of Representatives. Please join me in welcoming Michael, Rachel, and Elisa to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And thank you all for being here. Wow, those videos, I'm truly honored to be sharing even a few minutes of this event, and Mazal Tov, Bob, and Bob, to you and your families both. Michael, Elisa, thank you for traveling up to New York and taking some time to be here with us. I know our program is supposed to end at 2:30, so I will warn this is a teaser of all that they have to offer and say, and we will try and get you out of here on time. I'm going to pick up on some of what David was talking about. This idea that the United States arguably is more involved in the Middle East and in peacemaking between Israelis and Palestinians, between Israel and the Arab world, than in recent history. Whether you agree with how President Trump has approached this or not, he is certainly trying to make history. I think he really wants to see the Abraham Accords expand, Gaza stabilized, a permanent end to the war, a resolution of some form between Israelis and Palestinians. So, Ambassador Ratney, I'm going to start with you. How would you characterize the role the United States is playing in this moment and relative to other administrations that you've been a part of?
Thanks, Rachel. So I think it's true. It's also improbable because President Trump, especially in his first term, came into office uninterested in getting involved in almost anything overseas, and certainly not Middle Eastern quandaries. And he ended up getting involved in the mother of all Middle Eastern quandaries in a big way in his first administration, and then even in a bigger way, seemingly, in the first year of this administration. What I think characterizes it is just an extraordinary degree of personalization. Now, I've served in administrations since Bush 41, and every president brings a certain amount of personalization to Middle Eastern diplomacy or any diplomacy. I think Trump even more so. That's both intriguing and there's opportunity there. It's also sometimes a bit frightening. You know, I have to say the opportunity is that, you know, having been kind of a grizzled veteran of State Department bureaucracies for years, you see even those tiniest decisions take months and months and months to litigate and eventually change. Sometimes it never happens. Now you have a president that just, I'll give you an example, the sanctions on Syria after the Assad regime fell. When I worked on Syria, I sort of despaired that if Assad had ever gone, we had created this doomsday network of sanctions that could never be released. And yet Trump decided, partly because the Saudi crown prince and the Turkish president urged him to just sweep them away. And as a bureaucrat, it was a thing to behold. Even the decision to push Netanyahu in a direction that he apparently didn't want to go, end the war and get the hostages released, that's also something that defied President Biden for much of the end of his term. And Trump, because it was such a personalized relationship, and he just didn't care what other people said, just pushed it through. So there's opportunity there, and I have to appreciate that. There's also risk because it's so personalized. It's utterly at the whim of one person's views. And I will tell you from somebody that worked in a system where we tended to over-litigate and debate and have constant interagency meetings on other issues, on every issue, to not do that at all carries risks that other views aren't being taken into account, risks aren't being taken into account. And when you have a system in which everybody essentially tells the boss what he wants to hear, there could be problems. So right now we're at that hinge point, right? So the war is over, seemingly. The hostages are released. There's opportunity to move ahead in a way. But there's also risk because we don't know whether the kind of information that's getting to actual decision makers is really valid.
Thank you. Can I push on that or pull on one thing you mentioned, and that is the risk? You said, and I think appropriately so, the war is seemingly over. President Trump has a grand vision for what comes next. What happens if he fails? Where do we end up if his 20-point plan doesn't actually proceed to fruition?
You know, I guess the optimistic gloss is that if it doesn't work, then we're no worse off than we would have been without the 20-point plan at all. But at least the hostages are out, and at least the people of Gaza have had an opportunity to breathe for some period of time. But if it doesn't work, then we, really, Palestinians and Israelis, are stuck with this horrific situation in Gaza, a humanitarian catastrophe beyond anything anyone imagined was possible there, perhaps for our lifetimes. On the other hand, if there's a considered, rational approach on the way forward, there is an opportunity to improve the lives of the people of Gaza and to create a scenario in which the people of Israel can live without fear that that's going to resume again.
Thank you. Elisa, I'm going to give you a chance to weigh in on this broad question, but also the role of Congress. Everything we're talking about has the U.S. at the center. The U.S. is sort of playing kingmaker, negotiator, mediator, all of the above, the personality that is President Trump. How do you view the role of Congress in the U.S.-Israel relationship changing, the views of Israel in Congress changing, and what are your thoughts on where we might see that go?
So first of all, thank you so much to IPF for asking me to join you today. And I just want to say how pleased I am to get to work with the IPF team and the IPF ATID team. Such a wonderful collection of experts and true patriots. So thank you for that. There's a point that Michael made that I actually wanted to comment on, and that was this over-personalization piece and the risks associated with it. I think one of the other risks that we're seeing is when it is over-personalized and you don't have this kind of structure of the dull bureaucrats who every day are doing the boring diplomatic work to sustain it, it's highly unpredictable. And so you have not just our partners in Israel, but our partners throughout the region having to calculate in this sense of unpredictability, instability in U.S. investment, U.S. commitment, U.S. role in sustaining something that is incredibly hard to do, especially at the scale that the president has tried to lay the foundation to do it. So I think that level of unpredictability really helps to understand some of the things we see happening in the region, whether it's inside of Israel or whether it's in the neighboring countries. Something else that David said earlier, and Michael, I think, also said, and starts to answer the question on Congress too, Rachel, and that is that we've been through this period of what I call kind of post-war fatigue, a generational shift in the United States after the war on terror and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that is very central, I think, to what members of Congress are contending with when they look at the Middle East. What does the Middle East of tomorrow that is hopefully more stable, more prosperous, more in line with supporting U.S. shared interests? How does that happen from where we are today? And I think that really permeates the debate. And both Democrats and Republicans are contending with this. So while what we hear, because they're the most vocal, the most noisy, are the far left and the far right voices on this issue, I think it also is a very real debate within the parties writ large. And it becomes manifest, I think, very much as we talk about U.S.-Israel. What does the evolution of the relationship bilaterally look like? How does it move beyond perhaps what has been defined by the last 30 years to the next 30 years? And I'll give you an example on that. Even before the massacres on October 7th, the kinds of questions that people were asking were, how does Israel remain a secure Jewish and democratic state? How does the 77 years of a flourishing democracy turn into the next 77 years of a flourishing democracy? And I think that for both parties was answered differently. And I think that is still part of the debate that is ongoing. And now you fast forward after the October 7th massacres, after the war in Gaza, the fate of the Palestinians has become more of a live issue in the minds of politicians in a way that they haven't really had to contend with for the last 20 years. And so it is a shift. I think when we talk about support for the bilateral relationship, we can talk about specific areas of security, we can talk about it more broadly, and some of my concerns there, but why don't I stop and have you and Michael weigh in?
Michael, would you like to add anything on that? No. All right, easy. Then I'm going to come back to Elisa, you. One question I get often is, does the challenges that a lot of American voters have with our support for Israel right now, with U.S. support for Israel, particularly amidst the war in Gaza and now at the end of the war, or let's hope with the war being over, does that concern dissipate? Do we see Does it continue to expand? Do we see increased challenges among American voters or American members of the U.S. Congress for the support? Or as time goes on in the next coming years, might we see things go back to what we considered normal, the prior 30 years that you mentioned?
I don't think there's a status quo ante here. I don't think we go back. I do think that when we talk about where Israel is today and the remarkable demonstration of Israel's self-reliance and security capability over the last year alone, I think that informs as much as it does as the Gaza war and concerns about the war inform. And so I do think that we are headed toward a real conversation about what security assistance looks like in the future for a country like Israel that is so highly developed and has an enormous amount of potential to be technologically and militarily very, very advanced, far advanced than any of its neighbors. So I think there are a number of factors here that change the equation on how people think about security assistance itself. I think that's probably in the near term kind of changes on the margins, not the kind of categorical changes that, again, kind of loud voices seem to advocate for. But I do think it's something that voters and constituents are going to continue to want to talk about. And I think that members are seriously trying to understand and consider. What concerns me more than the security assistance is when we talk about the generational shifts and the changes in the Congress, how education about the strategic value of the U.S.-Israel relationship is understood, how the relationships between Americans and Israelis, broadly speaking, has evolved over the last 60 years, and the benefits to U.S. interests and shared interests that are not being talked about right now because of the context of the Gaza war, and making sure that that long-term change in the support is not on the wrong trajectory.
Thank you. Ambassador Ratney, I'm going to come back to you on this U.S.-Israel bilateral relationship, and then I'll come to both of you with the last question. I recall, both at the State Department and Defense Department, you sort of think Congress is off to the side often. So Congress and voters aside, how do you see the U.S.-Israel bilateral relationship changing? And, let's pretend Trump as a personality is not a force for the long term beyond this tenure of his presidency.
Right, because I think as long as Trump is president, it's completely personalized. The relationship is completely personalized in him and what his predilections are. And he clearly has a very complicated relationship with the Israeli prime minister. Going forward, I think you're right, there is no status quo ante in the relationship. Even if you have officials at the State Department or DOD that are sort of committed to a stable, pragmatic relationship with an important partner, the fact is they operate in a highly political universe in which the signals are drawn from a president, whoever, President Trump or whoever is after him, from Congress, and Congress from their voters. And I think that's changed rather fundamentally in the last couple of years in a way that a future administration is going to have to grapple with. Things that were taken for granted will no longer be taken for granted. And that's not simply because of a few hotheads on the left or on the right. It's because people with strong views on the left and on the right about Israel are increasingly forcing the hand of people in the middle who would like that pragmatic relationship. They're making it much harder for them, and they will make it increasingly difficult for them to carve out a normal, healthy, productive, pragmatic U.S.-Israeli relationship. And that's something, you'd be thankful for a group like IPF that kind of militantly guards that center and maintains it because it's important. Because looking ahead, it's going to be really hard to maintain that center.
Thank you. Okay, last question. We're going to come back to the current moment where President Trump is in charge. I think most of us in the room agree that we are in search of and support a sustainable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a secure democratic Israel, and a healthy U.S.-Israel relationship. If you had 2 minutes with the president, what would you recommend he do in support of that goal?
So the president has extraordinary leverage with the Israeli prime minister right now, more than any president, I think, in a long, long time. And that, for me, is for a simple reason. He's more popular than any Israeli prime minister, any Israeli politician at all right now. And he's used that he's used that leverage judiciously. I think he used it to end the war, to convince the Israeli prime minister to do something that he seemingly was not inclined to do. And he's rather judicious about how he uses it going forward. But I think if I had 2 minutes with him, I would say we have to get this or an Israeli government to a point, not where they decide they crave the creation of a Palestinian state or look forward to it, but he has to get this or an Israeli government to a point where they don't actively obstruct it, where they don't block the mere possibility that it could be created. Because I think that is going to cause huge problems both for Israel's relations with the Arab world and America's relation with Israel. If it's easy to say, look, this is not a great moment to have a conversation with Israelis about a two-state solution, that seems obvious to me, but it's quite another thing to say under no circumstances would an Israeli government permit the creation of a Palestinian state. That creates problems that I think will come home to roost in a big way in the coming years.
Thank you. Elisa?
So it's a variation on that theme, but because it's to this president, I think I would say swing big. We are actually at a very transformational moment in the Middle East. We've seen conditions change in a way that's quite remarkable since the early 80s. And so the best legacy producing set of actions I can imagine is to commit to what Michael was just laying out and harnessing what has been the most engaged Arab leadership on the issue of the Palestinian file that we have seen in generations, a willingness by the international community to do more than they have probably wanted to do on this file in decades. It's a moment, and it will be fleeting, and conditions on the ground will change. So this is your moment.
Okay. Thank you both. I'm told our time is up.
Thank you.
I just want to thank, I know it's brief, but I want to thank Ambassador Ratney, Elisa, and Rachel, and I want to pick up just on what Elisa just said about this transformational moment that we are faced with right now. It is one, as she said, that is fleeting, and we are at a critical moment in the days, months, and year to come for the issues that we care about, and Israel Policy Forum will play a critical role in that. I want to thank all of my colleagues here on this stage and Michael Koplow and the rest of our policy team who are really focused on those pragmatic policy ideas to move the ball forward today, as well as thank our team, the IPF team in the back, who's working to ensure that we have Jewish communal and policy leaders who are committed to these goals, to sustaining the goal of a secure Jewish democratic Israel for the long run. And lastly, to thank the Bobs and thank you all for your support of this work. And I invite you to join us for a dessert and coffee. But once again, thank you so much for all of your support of our work.